This right here is a black belt. It's a symbol of years of hard work, dedication, blood, sweat, and tears. To a lot of people, it also means you're worthy of being called sensei, sifu, or if you're really, really good, grandmaster. But here's the thing about that. Getting a black belt doesn't really mean anything, and martial artists should never call themselves grandmaster. Look, the uninformed public might think that the be-all end-all of martial arts is the black belt. But I'm willing to bet that if you're watching this video, you're not uninformed. Which means you know that earning a black belt usually means you're a first degree. First of many. And as you climb up each of those ranks, there of course usually comes a title. This is where we get stuff like sensei, sifu, grandmaster, super grandmaster, supreme mega ultra grandmaster. You get the idea. But here's the thing. These titles don't usually mean anything. And I'm not saying that in a all a black belt does is hold your pants up kind of way, which by the way, that's not what they're for. They're meant to hold the gi closed, but that's a different conversation. I'm saying literally the grandmaster, senior grandmaster, dai sifu, all these titles are the martial arts equivalent of a liberal arts degree. In the beginning, ranking was pretty straightforward. A white belt was a student, the black belt was his teacher. Eventually, we added the brown belt and blue belt and every other color of the rainbow, but really that was more for student retention than anything else. At the end of the day, it was a pretty simple, straightforward system to differentiate people's roles on the floor. Spiritually though, being given a black belt was a sign of your relationship to your instructor. It meant that you've been with them for enough time to where they've seen you progress through the system and felt you were competent enough to teach new people. It meant your instructor no longer saw you as a pupil and instead saw you as a peer. And in small group situations like this, titles are pretty straightforward. The guy with the black belt, the one who runs the program, we call him sensei because sensei means teacher and that's what he does. It's at this point we have to start talking about the difference between titles of skill and titles of relationship. The thing is, Chinese, Japanese, and a whole bunch of other languages are what you call tonal languages, meaning the way you say something in the context that you say it can change the way a word is defined. Words like sensei or sifu can mean teacher, but depending on how you say them, they can also mean master or expert. So I can call my martial arts instructor my sifu and it'll mean my teacher, but I can equally call a professional chef sifu, not because he's my chef, but because he's a professional. So ultimately, here's the problem. These are very nuanced terms that are translated into plain, simple English. And when you do that, you run the risk of doing it wrong. Think about it like this. Martial arts is a lot like academia. Anybody who teaches it is the equivalent of a professor. Their teacher was also a professor, but given the length of time, has probably moved on in their career to become a chair or department head or something similar. Someone being a department chair or a dean doesn't mean they're better or worse than a professor. It just means they have different and possibly more responsibilities. In Japanese, for example, we have titles like shihan and konsho, which are descriptions of someone's skill, or it's someone who's opened up their own school, or it's someone who's otherwise contributed greatly to the spread of a martial art. Now, I can already see your comments. Martial arts is more of a military affair than an academic one, so the rank should reflect military titles. No. This might be a shock for you to hear, but you are not a warrior, and your gym is not an army. Warriors are preparing for, war. If a military doesn't have a clear chain of command, it's very hard to wage effective warfare. And hierarchies exist so that everyone knows their place in the chain of command. But martial arts schools don't work like that. Because notice, we call them martial arts schools and not armies. For the most part, martial arts schools are private businesses where the guy who pays the rent is usually also the head instructor. There might be a few coaches helping him or maybe some people running a different program, but for the most part, it's just the one guy. At the end of the day, there's only 3 kinds of people that come to the martial arts. People with huge egos that want to show them off, people who haven't discovered their ego yet, and people who are just looking to have a good time. We're going to discard that third group for right now because they're pretty much harmless and have nothing to do with the conversation. But when you get people whose primary motivation is to feed their ego, one of two things is going to happen. Either A, they're going to find a healthy way to express that and become the ideal martial artist, or they're going to find a toxic way to express their ego, and they're going to start beating up on their sparring partners, not listening to their coaches, and for the context of this video, become coaches and instructors who demand that you call them grandmaster. Listen, martial arts are supposed to humble you. They're supposed to teach you how to be a better person by learning how to persevere through adversity. But that only happens if you're constantly checking in with yourself. When you come into a sparring session and get trashed by a better fighter, that's checking your ego. But once you start teaching, it's very easy to go overboard, because now you are the beacon of all martial arts knowledge. And at least generally, you're going to be the most skilled person on the floor. Once you get your black belt and start teaching, or even worse, once you start promoting people to black belt and they start teaching for you, you start to think, you know, I really am more than just an instructor. I want to be called master. In fact, you know what? I think I want to be called grandmaster. And it's at this point that your wife starts wishing she married that farm boy back in her hometown. Here's the thing. It doesn't matter what language we're talking about. You never call yourself anything. Whether we're talking about Japanese sensei, Chinese sifu, Thai crew, whatever. These are titles that other people use to describe you, but you don't get to do it to yourself. And titles like Hanshi, Shihan, Grandmaster, those are given to you symbolically by other instructors or, again, by your own students. It is beyond pretentious to go around calling yourself, or worse still, changing your Facebook profile name to Sifu Buttasses. And, like Game of Thrones famously taught us, any man who has to say, I am the king, most certainly isn't. Like I said earlier, calling yourself Grandmaster is like bragging about your liberal arts degree. Sure, you probably studied really hard to get there, and you might know a lot, but it doesn't really prepare you to do anything, and I don't want to talk to you about it. Now, of course, that isn't always the case. We both know plenty of Grandmasters who are still training every single day and earnestly spread the martial art to anybody who will listen. Fine, let's accept that. But let me ask you this. Wouldn't these people still be training and spreading the martial art anyway because they love it and the title is more of an afterthought? In a perfect world, I say we get rid of titles altogether, but I recognize that that's never going to happen. I think the best we can hope for is a replacement. Instead of using titles that describe what a person is, we have titles that describe what they do. I think coach and professor already do a good job of this. You coach a person or you profess knowledge to people. And if you want to move up in rank from there, we have chief instructor or senior professor, whatever. These describe what a person does, implies they've been doing it for a long time, and maybe come part and parcel with a few more responsibilities. At the end of the day, titles don't make you a better martial artist. But in the wrong hands, they can make you a worse one. So if you're a teacher, be a teacher. That's okay. But you're not a grandmaster. And that's okay too. Be sure to subscribe.